Coping with a national emergency now on BBC2 at Crisis Command. 3 members of the public face the pressure of a fictitious disaster scenario, guided by experts and Gavin Hewitt.
Here in the Crisis Command Centre, 3 people who've never met will be put in an extraordinary position of power as they take over the reins of government and run this country during a simulated national emergency. They have volunteered to be ministers, and tonight they'll find out if they've got what it takes to survive at the very top. They are Robert Bean, Managing Director of a London communications agency.
We're condemning 2,000 people. That's guaranteed.
Not necessarily.
Guaranteed.
Not necessarily.
Kay Hammond, Managing Director of a Birmingham-based web design agency.
But I think we need to give them the right to do that. We need to authorise the right to do that if all other means fail. The right to shoot them if all other means fail.
And Alan Schofield, a business development advisor from Manchester.
They're emptying, they're pouring out the streets, down the motorways
we need to do it now and we can
Your net
contain
needs to be wider to catch them over.
We can come to that.
The ministers are not alone. Helping them are 3 genuine experts with real-life experience of crisis management. They are military specialist Sir Tim Garden, emergency services expert Charles Shoebridge, and communications advisor Amanda Platell. You can make your own decisions at home, and if you have a digital television, press red now to find out whether you can take better decisions than the ministers here in the Crisis Command Centre. We have a national emergency, and it's about to begin. Ministers, you've been brought here today because we have a potential crisis on our hands. There has been an outbreak of a suspicious illness in Liverpool, and I'd like to take you over right away to what the news channels are saying.
27 patients have been quarantined in an emergency isolation ward at St Mark's Hospital in Liverpool. 6 others are in intensive care. They're all said to be very poorly and suffering severe flu-like symptoms. Health officials fear if the infection is contagious, this could be the start of an epidemic.
Doctors say they don't know the cause of the outbreak and insist the quarantine is just a precaution. They're appealing to GPs to be on the lookout for patients suffering from high temperatures, headaches and nausea.
Ministers, what I can tell you is there are 6 patients who have been quarantined. Clearly this is potentially serious. Now, on the ground in Liverpool, the situation is being coordinated by the police, by a police commander. And I think we should go over by video link to that commander.
The emergency services have been put on full alert. Our first aim is to identify contaminated areas and cordon them off. We also are preparing decontamination tents and temporary quarantine centres in case they're required. Police are interviewing the victims and their families to establish a path to the infections. It's a huge task. If we're looking at a major health scare or the deliberate release of a hazardous substance, we really don't have enough personnel in Liverpool to deal with this incident.
I mean, Ministers, the incident commander there is looking to you for guidance, and they want a decision from you. Do you want just to use the Liverpool emergency services, or do you want to bring in emergency services from elsewhere in the UK, or do you actually want, at this stage, to use the army? With each decision the ministers face, they must choose the correct option as decided by a team of professional crisis managers. They can call on their advisors at any time.
Well, the policeman there is basically saying or intimating that it could be a deliberate release, that it isn't a disease. I mean, whether that's true or false, that, who's to know? But, nobody's going to criticise us for being overcautious in these times. And I think we should give them all the support we can. And also, I'm not convinced that a local town like Liverpool is going to have the expertise to deal with this, and the army has the expertise.
What can the Liverpool police do for us? How well equipped are they to handle this situation at the moment as it stands?
They're struggling, Minister. What's happening is that already they're bringing in their people off leave and so on. Of course, we can accelerate that process. We can bring in the next shift, but of course the problem there is that you're going to deplete your resources for the medium-term future.
If we start bringing in emergency services from surrounding areas, if this does spread, they're going to require to be deployed in their own areas. Whereas if we can get the army in there and contain it, and even if, you know, heaven forbid, but even if we had to write Liverpool off, we could, and surround it with the army.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. I also have to say there may be some fresh information on the numbers affected in Liverpool.
Ministers, the latest update, the Liverpool NHS, they actually want to put out a statement releasing the following figures. 45 people have been admitted with probable symptoms. 16 people are now in intensive care, and it's claimed its first victim, one person, a 39-year-old male, has died.
My first feeling was to actually bring in other resources within the UK, because getting the army involved, it's going to create a huge sort of public perception that we have a massive problem that may not actually be that massive, and hysteria and panic that we might cause can almost be as damaging as what's going on. And I'm sure we can get some advice on what kind of impression that's going to give.
Minister, your instincts are absolutely right. I mean, the key thing when you're handling a public crisis, and we don't know if this is yet, is to have public confidence. And if they see you putting the army in and it turns out to be something quite minor, I mean, look what happened when the tanks went into Heathrow. First of all, people were really scared, and then they just laughed, and it actually belittled the government afterwards.
Well, I'd rather let them laugh than have a riot on our
Minister,
hands.
I think an army at this stage is a complete overreaction.
Well, Minister, what do you think is the right thing to do?
I would not call in the military in that case. I would rely on Liverpool plus other local nearby services, if that's possible.
So just to get you right, Minister, you are relying essentially upon the Liverpool emergency services?
Essentially.
Essentially?
Yeah.
All right. Minister, where do you stand in this?
I think we should mobilise the army straight away and overkill. I'd rather overkill it than underkill it.
Minister?
I disagree with both of my fellow ministers.
Well, ministers, you've got to come to an agreement here. I can't pass back a decision saying I've got three ministers sitting in the crisis command centre and they can't agree with each other.
I think you're almost in agreement with me that you feel that Liverpool can mainly rely, but I would like to bring in other UK police resources to assist.
Yes.
We've already got the army in position. We probably need those. We need the expertise more than anything else.
I think we will create other crises in the country if we bring the military in now with the hysteria levels.
The guy from Liverpool screaming for help. He's saying, look,
and we're
I can't
offering
cope,
it, but
I
I'd
can't
like
cope.
to bring in other resources from the UK to help them.
I agree with that. I think we keep this in the police's hands for now and reserve the army.
Ministers, do I take it we now have a majority decision?
I want to bring in other UK resources.
Other UK resources?
Yes, sir.
All right, ministers, we don't have agreement, but you have taken a decision, and it will be enacted. The ministers have made the wrong decision. Personnel should not be drafted in from areas where they may be needed if the disease were to spread. The correct decision is to call in the army. All troops are trained to deal with chemical and biological incidents, whereas only 5% of police have the necessary expertise and equipment. The ministers have failed to prepare for the worst-case scenario. As the number of infections increase within the hospital, pressure on the ministers is mounting. I now have some information which is just for you. This isn't going out on any media. It's just for you, for ministers in this crisis command centre. And it comes from Porton Down, the government's research centre. And I'd like to take you over on a secure line immediately to there.
We have a preliminary identification from the Liverpool samples. Now, we can't be 100% sure at this point, but we think we are looking at the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It's commonly known as bubonic plague.
Plague. Mind you, he's not 100% sure. Not 100%.
But I think we probably need to treat it like that. I would just like to know a bit more about bubonic. We've had it in this country before.
Well, I've got some figures from Porton Down which may be useful to you. That treatment with normal antibiotics will reduce the death rate of the plague to about 7%, which is still high, of course, for it. And we're thinking sort of larger than SARS, really, in this. But you've got to get the antibiotics as soon as the symptoms arise. We also have a standard procedure, Ministers, you should be aware of, that we treat even an isolated case of plague currently as though it might be terrorism.
I think we have an update on some of what's developing in Liverpool, the figures.
Yes, Minister, from the hospital, I'm afraid 2 people have now died. We've got 19 in intensive care and several are on respirators. 74 in total have now been identified with symptoms of the disease.
Now, I think we can go back to the hospital and talk to the registrar there.
There's been a very important development in the diagnosis of this outbreak. We aren't seeing the red swellings under the arms and in the groin area, which would be the usual telltale signs of a case of bubonic plague. We can't be sure, but we think what we are dealing with is a far more serious incident of pneumonic plague. This form of the disease is highly contagious. We believe that some of the medical personnel who've been working on the wards have also been infected.
Ministers, that was clearly new information, but I'd like to take you over to the consultant who's on a video link back at the hospital. I'd like to talk to you.
The patients with plague are being held in isolation wards. We're doing everything we can for them. The wards are sealed, and we've reduced the pressure in the wards to try and reduce the risk of infection. But we're worried that the other patients who don't have plague symptoms now might catch the disease. They'd be safer if we could evacuate them to other hospitals. Also, we need to know whether the hospital staff can come and go or not.
Ministers, this is a life and death decision. Would you like to evacuate non-plague patients, those patients who don't have the plague, non-plague patients and other staff who don't have the plague, or would you like to seal off the hospital?
We've got to seal it off. I mean, it's spreading like wildfire.
I agree.
We've just got to seal it, and it's sad and it's terrible, but we might even be writing off the old town, so, and hospitals, you know, it's small potatoes.
All the people that are unaffected at the moment, or unsymptomatic, more accurately, at the moment, we don't know if they're going to become symptomatic. What we can try and do is contain it, which is something that we've spoken about.
Could be carriers, you know.
But yeah, from the first minute, if we let anyone come and go, then we're introducing it to other environments.
Of course, the immediate implication of completely sealing off the hospital is that we condemn everybody in it to be exposed to this. Now, that's probably a less worse option. What level of certainty do we have that somebody who's there might not be yet contaminated? Is there any way of knowing?
There is no screening mechanism for this disease, unfortunately. And
then containment is
we've got to contain
our only option. I mean, we're not saying that these people are going to die. The evacuation, I'm sure we can get more information on how much hysteria it would cause, but if that got out to the press, and that, you know, got on everybody's TV screens, that is going to, again, cause mass panic.
These people, you're talking about them as though they don't exist. Let me tell you about these people. There's 950 beds in this hospital, and it's almost full occupancy. It was visiting time. So you've got dads visiting new babies in the maternity wing. It's got nearly 5,000 staff on their payroll. They've been calling extra staff in, so there's at least 2,000 people in there. Do your figures, most of these people haven't even got anywhere near this thing. They're completely, they're not only innocent, they're not contaminated. And you will, I can promise you, the headlines tomorrow in the paper will be Death Hospital, and you will be named as the Death Ministers. You are burying these people alive.
Yeah, well, maybe that's what has to be done. And there's no... They may survive, who knows?
You're trying to make assessments and you haven't yet taken a judgment about how dangerous this is. I've just got it from Porton Down. This is contagious not just by touching, this is at 2 metres from an individual. The breath, the sneezing, anything, water droplets will contaminate.
So
do you want to know what the lethality is of this?
Yes, yes, please, yeah.
You know, this is the sort of factor that I think you want to take into account. We're talking about a mortality rate untreated of 100% with this. And even if we treat it with the antibiotics, we're at 50% treated at the moment. So, I mean, sealing, your preference for sealing the hospital, Minister, seems to me to be absolutely right in this. We've got a real problem on our hands.
Just interested to know a little bit more about this part evacuation.
Mister, I appreciate we don't have all day here. You know, this isn't a debating society we're running. You're actually running the country. You know, you've got to make a decision here. Every moment that you wait, people could be coming in and out of that hospital.
Then
you have got to
seal it.
decide.
Seal it.
Seal it. Let's just seal it. Let's protect ourselves from anybody else being exposed right now. It's not a great decision to make, but there isn't a good decision to make here.
Well, when you look back on it in history, that was the obvious, dare I even say it, knee-jerk feeling. That was certainly my view when we first had this news. I don't think I've heard quite enough yet how this phased evacuation works, where people aren't just let loose into the streets.
Let me very quickly explain, Minister.
Yeah.
All that's going to happen is that designated buses, sealed buses, they're not going to be taped up, but they're certainly sealed. We've got this 2-metre range. That nobody's going to come within that distance.
What if the bus crashes?
What if it has
just
a
let
him finish it, yes.
And you can consider these options.
Exactly.
The buses will take them off to a pre-designated place, maybe another hospital that we've cleared, maybe an army tent city, something like that. All we need is the decision so that these things can be started set in chain.
I mean, hearing that, my view is, if where it is that these people are taken to is sealed and contained, so we're not just moving it from one place to another, that's a big if, but if that's the case, then it's very difficult just to condemn 2,000 or more people.
It's really difficult, but if anything along that way goes wrong, or anybody else becomes involved for whatever reason, they are then exposed, and we are adding to our list of potential casualties.
And you're creating multiple sites.
No, I'm still believing that those that are evacuated don't need treating as such, and we can then concentrate on those who are left.
What if
That's
something happens with the logistics when we start moving people out? As I say, there's an accident in the road.
The only known thing that's going to happen is that we're condemning 2,000 people. That's guaranteed.
Not necessarily.
Guaranteed.
Not necessarily.
Guaranteed. If we move some out, we stand a chance of reducing the numbers.
And spreading it.
We stand a chance, but it could go two ways. That's the roll of the dice.
And, Ministers, you've taken on board what your fellow Minister has saying. You may be condemning people. You understand that because you will be asked about it afterwards.
Absolutely.
We have more than one option. And how we can say that we will willfully and willingly condemn those people because they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think we're doing enough to try.
Or we could condemn many thousands of people.
We could, but the move we're making...
It's a protective stance,
proactively trying to manage the situation. It could bounce the wrong way, that's true, and history could judge us that way, but history at the moment would judge us as having willfully condemned people.
Can you be persuaded, or are you adamant you're right on this?
I'm sorry, I can't be persuaded.
Minister?
No, we've got to seal that hospital as soon as we possibly can. And if people die, it's bad, but people are dying now.
We have a decision. It's not a unanimous one, but I think we have a decision, and it will be enacted. Knowing the disease is highly contagious, the ministers must attempt to prevent its spread. No one should be allowed to leave the hospital. In Toronto, during the SARS epidemic, staff and patients were permitted to leave hospitals in the early stages of the outbreak. This led to the spread of the disease from one hospital to another. The ministers have made the correct decision. With the hospitals sealed, the ministers have so far contained this outbreak of pneumonic plague. If allowed to escape the hospital, it would risk the lives of millions. The situation in the hospital is pretty tense. Have a look at this.
Well, emotions are starting to run high here. St Mark's Hospital is effectively under siege from the relatives and friends of the patients who are being kept inside that sealed building. People just aren't convinced by the explanation that their loved ones are safe inside there, and they're demanding their immediate release. Meanwhile, those inside, both patients and visitors, are of course desperate to get out. A few minutes ago, I managed to speak to one patient. She's just had a baby and says she's ready to come home. She thinks she and her child are being put at unnecessary risk. But health officials say this is the only way to contain the epidemic.
As you can hear, ministers, there is a good deal of concern going on inside that hospital in Liverpool. But I'd like to connect you back to Porton Down via video link, because they've got an interesting development there.
We are currently trialling a vaccine for plague, which seems to be far more successful than previous attempts. Now, at this point, it's only been given to 12 people, but so far we have seen no adverse side effects. We have produced another 1,200 doses for a full-scale field trial, which we must do if the vaccine is to be given a license. However, under the circumstances, I wondered whether you wouldn't prefer us to send the doses straight to the hospital.
There is a decision that you have to take. They have enough vaccine to treat everybody inside that hospital in Liverpool. And the question for you is this: will you authorise the use of that unlicensed vaccine, yes or no?
Well, when we were speaking about this earlier, we'd said that these people were condemned to death because they were going to catch this plague anyway. So if that's true, that as this runs its course, this plague will spread to them, they will all die, well, maybe we should authorise the vaccine and say, yeah, OK, you know, explain the situation and let them take it.
This is as much a moral argument as it is a logistical argument. We have condemned those people to that hospital. That was the decision that was taken. We're now discussing the possibility of filling them with a vaccine that doesn't yet have a licence, the side effects of which we have not the first idea. So having treated them as guinea pigs in the first instance, we're throwing, metaphorically, not good money after bad, we're compounding the problem by even vaguely suggesting that, oh, because they're all doomed in there, we may as well use this as some kind of experiment. I mean, it's absolutely horrifying. We cannot do that. It is not a chance we can do that. We have to use the only known medication we have. It's not perfect, we know that, but that's the only thing we can do. Those people who are already standing there saying, why are members of my family locked inside that building? And we're now going to go, well, seeing as they're stuck there and they're doomed, we're going to experiment with some new drugs. Forget it. Over my dead body, that's not happening.
Well, it might be over your dead body, because if we don't prove the vaccine, at some point, whatever happens with this disease, if it escalates, that vaccine is going to be tested. And I'll tell you something, if we can prove that vaccine in this hospital, as it starts spreading, we will have a vaccine.
It might be.
Take it those people are already sacrificed, you might say, for the better good of the nation. Well, great.
It's not like we have nothing. We have antibiotics. We know they're not great. But I don't think that we have the right to take this decision.
We've already written them off, haven't we? We've already said, look, the hospital's closed, and if they catch the disease, they'll die. Give them some protection.
We're not writing anybody off.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think we can bring you an update on some of the figures of what's happening in Liverpool.
Yes, Minister, within the hospital now we have 87 suspected cases. We have 28 people now in a serious condition, and I'm afraid there have been 5 deaths in total.
Ministers, you've heard those new figures. You've got to take a decision here. The longer you wait, the more this crisis is developing. What is it to be, Minister?
Well, I think we've just got to authorise that vaccine. We're in a very difficult position. The vaccine's been presented to us as an option. We know people will benefit if we can deploy that vaccine. Go for it. Let's pick up the pieces
Minister,
afterwards.
Go for it.
No, antibiotics, proven medication, as much of it as we can.
Minister, you have 2 fellow ministers who are divided. Where do you fall on this?
I think this is a really, really hard decision.
Save them lives.
Of course, that is human nature, but we might not be doing that. We might be making the situation a whole lot worse. My decision is to say no to the vaccine.
Dear me. Are you sure?
I am now.
Well, what can I say? I think that, you know, by doing that, we've missed a golden opportunity that probably won't come again, and we will pay a very heavy price for not testing that vaccine.
I hope that's something we don't have to find out.
Well, Minister, it's not a unanimous decision, but I think a decision has been taken, and it will be enacted. The ministers have made their second incorrect decision. It is legal to use an unlicensed vaccine with patient consent. The ministers should have given the people in the hospital that potentially life-saving option. As tensions rise in Liverpool, emergency services are preparing for the worst. A police cordon is put in place around the sealed hospital. Now, I'd also like to connect you back to the government research laboratory back at Porton Down.
We've confirmed that the bacteria is definitely a strain of plague. According to the DNA test results, it isn't a strain that we've seen in this country before. We're currently running tests to see if it's resistant to various forms of antibiotic. We are worried that it may be a genetically modified form of the disease.
OK, can we get some advice? If something is genetically modified, does that mean it's been tampered with by human hands, or can this be a natural occurrence?
Well, they don't know for certain, but it's not the strains that they're used to. And one of the worries is that during the Cold Wars in the Soviet Union, they did some experiments on genetically modifying plague in particular, and we haven't tracked all the stocks there, so that sort of is a worry to our counter-terrorism people.
Ministers, you should also be aware of a report that's just run.
And some news just coming in from Dublin. 5 passengers aboard a ferry on its way to the city from Holyhead have been taken seriously ill. Air Sea Rescue helicopters have been put on standby in case they have to be evacuated. We don't have any other details on that right now, but obviously, given the situation with people being taken ill in Liverpool, we'll keep a close eye on the story and bring you more as we get it.
Ministers, I can connect you to the Coast Guard at Holyhead.
We received this message from the captain of one of the largest passenger ferries in the Irish Sea. I can play it to you now.
Some of our passengers are very ill. Apparently one man can hardly breathe. We've isolated 5 people in the sick bay, but I'm very worried for the rest of the passengers and the crew. Our current position is 53 degrees and 20 minutes north, 5 degrees 45 minutes east, heading for Dublin City Port. Please advise us how to proceed.
The ferry left Holyhead just over 2 hours ago and will reach Dublin in just over half an hour.
So, Ministers, what have we got here? We've got a ferry carrying 2,000 people heading for Dublin. Some reports of people on board who are unwell. We don't know whether they've got the plague or not. What do you want to do? Tell the captain to bring the ferry back to Holyhead. Ask the Dublin authorities to quarantine the ferry. Evacuate the victims by helicopter, or send antibiotics and medical support to the ferry. You're going to have to take a pretty quick decision here. I'm told the ferry will soon be out of UK waters.
I think either quarantine it in Dublin or bring him back. But we don't want it to spread. We've got to bring it back, really.
Can we ask it to remain at sea while we send these medical supplies to them?
If we make a quick decision, Minister, we can get it back. And of course, I mean, we have got search and rescue helicopters at Anglesey, at RAF Valley, that could get across there, and we keep it out in UK waters till we sort it out.
If that ferry hits Dublin and goes into Ireland, we've spread it again. I think we've got to bring that ferry back.
It's going to take 2 hours to bring it back.
Lovely.
One way or another, it's a bad decision to bring it back, surely. We're giving those people on the ferry less chance of surviving and getting proper medical aid, which they could get within 30 minutes. There could be hysteria. We just don't know. It may be nothing.
We don't know, and every decision along here, it's just got worse and worse with this plague. It started as a few people suffering. Now we've got a plague that we can't cure.
Because we're running out of time, let's bring it back.
OK, I understand. Minister. Well, every second that you're sitting here...
Yes.
It's getting closer to Dublin, and we're going to lose our right to make that decision.
Well, the Dublin authorities will want to have this resolved just as much as we will want to have it resolved.
So your decision,
I mean, of those, we have to quarantine it in Dublin then.
But we've lost control. It's a foreign government then who's got control of our bubble.
They're an enemy, though. I think they want what we want.
No, we're not saying that.
But to share everything with them, we might not want to do that.
We've got all our knowledge. We can act on everything a lot quicker if it's on our mainland or very close to. We haven't got to let people off when they get there. We can still send antibiotics when they get back to us.
We can do everything else, just bring it back
And we
in.
can manage the situation in one country, which is going to be a lot easier logistically.
Fine.
Good. OK?
Yep.
That appears to be a decision. Bring the ferry back, and your decision will be enacted. Every attempt must be made to contain the plague. Allowing the ferry to be quarantined in Dublin risks an outbreak in Ireland. The ferry should stay in UK waters. The ministers have made the correct decision. It is now over an hour since the hospital was sealed, and as infections continue to rise, the country learns about the seriousness of the situation. Ministers, it may be helpful for you to see what the news channels are currently reporting.
We have some news just coming in on the outbreak of a mystery illness in the northwest. I'm joined by our science correspondent Fergus Walsh. Fergus, what can you tell us?
Well, I've just been speaking to some very senior people at the Department of Health and the government laboratories at Porton Down, and what they're telling me, and I have to stress these are impeccable sources, is that the disease we're dealing with here is pneumonic plague. This is an even more deadly version of bubonic plague. The two are quite closely related. It's more dangerous because, untreated, it's almost always fatal. And what's more, it's highly contagious. Anyone within a few feet of someone who's infected is at risk. Now, I understand tests have been done and redone, and there is no doubt. So what we're dealing with here is far, far more serious than we first thought.
Ministers, you do face your next decision. The hospital in Liverpool is sealed on your orders. But do you want to extend the quarantine in the light of the information you've got? And quite specifically, your options are this. Do you want to just keep the quarantine to the hospitals where the plague is found? Do you want to extend the quarantine to the city of Liverpool? Do you want to extend the quarantine to the northwest of England? Or go even wider, quarantine the north of England?
Well, it's the logistics issue, isn't it? What we want to do and what we can do are probably two different things. We probably need to have some idea of what we can do.
We can't give a perfect seal for everywhere, but it seems to me, I mean, remember back to foot and mouth. We didn't actually solve that till we got the army in and stopped movement. And we're talking about infection now. We want to stop movement. So what we can do is we can put major roadblocks, we can stop the trains, we can close ports, we can close airports, and we can tell people do not move. Now, that won't stop everybody moving, but we can at least, we can say within that area, we can put a curfew on and we can do all sorts of things. But it'll take me a time to gear up the army, but I have your authority, I take it, to get them ready for whatever your decision is now.
But again, looking at the map that's flashing, we can see that by quarantining the north of England, we are bringing in Anglesey and Holyhead, which will look after our ferry, which is a...
And I'll say reports are coming in, ministers, from traffic cameras and so on in Liverpool area. That news that's just gone out is spreading like wildfire. People are getting in their cars.
I think then it is very urgent then that we do seal off the area, isn't it? The question is
how much of the area?
Well, if it's north of England, if they're already splitting now, they're not going to get out of the north of England by the time, hopefully, we can ring off the M6. There's pinch points into Scotland, and hopefully we can do the same down south.
Can I just interrupt you, please? I really feel you need to just stop and think. You made a very hard decision earlier on to seal that hospital. You have succeeded in doing that. You have contained this thing. If you close... I mean, look at the size of the area we're talking about. If you close that, you close Britain for how many months to come, I don't know. It will cost the country billions and billions of pounds. I'm not sure whether it could ever recover. You have contained this thing. Have some confidence in your decisions.
We haven't contained it because it's gone.
The ferry back.
The ferry's gone. Yeah, but the ferry got out.
We have an issue here of very limited resources. The wider this net is cast, the thinner and least effective it will be. We really don't have much in the way of extra resources, certainly at the moment, beyond containing Liverpool.
We should certainly start with Liverpool and move in urgently. If then it's dribbled out beyond that, we're going to have to cope then, but we're going to have to shut that down.
Like the ferry situation, which is unconfirmed, we don't have anybody walking around Liverpool outside of a sealed hospital that we know is infected. Right. So extending it to Liverpool...
Minister, sorry to interrupt you. There is a development back at the hospital.
I've just seen one of the plague patients coughing up blood. It's such a terrible way to die. There's a lot of really scared people here, I'm telling you. It's all right for the IDU staff, we've got proper equipment, but the other wards haven't got anything to stop them catching the plague if it's out there.
Yeah, we knew that was going to happen. We just have to live with that, won't we?
Yeah, it doesn't make it any less of a bitter pill to swallow.
But it's not going to distract us from quarantining the rest.
What it does mean is you've got to make a decision about the quarantine. I mean, you've heard what's happening in the hospital. The people on the ground are crying out for a decision from you. You've heard all the arguments. What's it to be?
My thoughts at the moment are to keep the quarantine we have in place. I wouldn't actually extend it, and the reason for that is there is no evidence to me at the moment that there are any infections outside of hospitals that we've already secured.
All right? Keep the existing quarantine.
That is a very good argument, apart from... I think they're in the northwest. I think...
Quarantine the
north
northwest.
of England.
Sorry? The north of England?
It will be the easiest logistically to sort.
And yours?
Well, I'm afraid I think we quarantine Liverpool, so we've got 3 different answers.
All right, what do I do, Ministers? Phone up and say you can't make your minds up? I'm going to give you just a brief moment to see if we can get a decision here.
Because they know it's plague, they're panicking, they're spreading all over the place. We can, wherever they run to, all they're doing is running further into a quarantined area.
Bigger net, bigger holes.
I agree with that. I think the issue is really here, which is containing the hospitals sufficient to manage what is becoming a runaway plague? I would like to throw a larger ring around the hospitals, which is Liverpool, with all the attendant logistical problems, but it seems to me preventative is better than curative.
I can accept that argument, but the most I will accept, if that is what I have to get a decision, is extending it to Liverpool.
Yeah.
And I still feel we should keep it to the hospitals.
They've already gone.
I still feel we should keep it to the hospitals, but I'm going to support you in extending it to Liverpool, but not to
Liverpool. Liverpool's gone. They're emptying. They're pouring out the streets, down the motorways.
No, we need to do it now, and we can contain it.
Your net needs to be wider to catch them who've run.
We can come to that.
Ministers, I'm going to go on a majority decision. It's even hard enough getting any decision. All right, Ministers, you have taken a decision, and I'll pass it on. And that decision is, just to make it clear, that you're going to quarantine the city of Liverpool. Right. Ministers, that decision will be enacted. The Ministers have made another correct decision. Even with thousands of troops, large-scale regional cordons would be ineffective. In this crisis, the best option was to quarantine Liverpool. The army would be brought in to set up roadblocks and control access to the city. The Ministers have now made 3 correct decisions.
Britain is in the grip of a plague epidemic. 5 people have now died. Over 80 people in the Liverpool area are being held in isolation wards and treated for plague. Among the sick are hospital staff exposed before the deadly disease was identified. Inside St Mark's Hospital, over 1,000 people have been sealed in to prevent the spread of the disease to the rest of the city. There is evidence of increasing fear and desperation among those being detained. This was the scene earlier, as one patient, a young man, was arrested by police in chemical protection suits after smashing a ground floor window in a bid to escape from the quarantined hospital.
I've got information that things are moving quite dramatically on the ground, and I'd like to link you to the police commander via video link.
The situation is that we've got an angry crowd threatening to break out of the hospital. The doors are locked, but my men on the door say they won't hold for much longer. There are over 200 people. I only have 40 officers on the scene, and only 15 or 16 of them are wearing chemical protection suits. I do have a number of armed response units standing by.
Ministers, this is really, really urgent. You've got to take a decision here. What the police are asking, should they arrest people who are trying to break out of that hospital? Should they use riot control measures? Or do you, as the ministers in charge, authorise the use of firearms?
What,
Are the police in suits at the moment? Are they in protective suits to actually protect them from the hazard?
There are about 15 or 16 officers in protective suits, Ministers, that's all.
Are they telling us that they can't enforce the quarantine around that hospital and that people are going to leave that hospital and contaminate the rest of the country?
People are trying to get out, Minister. They're held back by a glass door, I think you heard them say. There's a feeling that might go. If it does, there's a chance people will escape, yes. That's the situation.
What exactly is riot control?
Yeah.
We're talking about 2 levels here, Minister. The officers that are guarding the gate, if you like, the glass door, they will have ordinary riot equipment, protective shields. They'll also have their batons and maybe CS spray. Further back, one of the 3 firearms units you heard referred to in the message there is a baton gun unit. These officers have baton guns, which are, in ordinary parlance, rubber bullets, or plastic bullets, more accurately, yes, Minister. You know that they've never been used in riot control situation on the mainland before. It's an option for you to really consider.
In the instance of arrest and, as it were, deportation to another place, can the other place be sealed off and contained and...
Well, the problem is, Minister, again, we've got resources, we've also got a huge urgency here. This is going to happen any second by the sound of things that these doors are going to go.
My problem, Minister, is that you've only just authorised the military into Liverpool. We'd have a large number of people in protective kit, but I can't get them here for probably the first lot within the hour, I suppose it'll be. It does seem to me that in the meanwhile, we'll need to make sure that the police can hold that line, even if that means using most extreme methods to do it.
If you start arresting people, every time you arrest somebody, you're going to take an officer in protective equipment away from the scene.
No, I understand that. No, I think that's, in my view, the second worst option. The worst option being use firearms. Of those three, it seems riot control does at least buy us time.
Is it going to be effective?
But if one person gets through...
Well,
whatever means necessary.
Sorry to interrupt. We can go to the police communications network there on the ground.
They are glass, repeat, glass doors. Looks like one man is trying to smash them with a chair. We've only got 2 officers holding them back, but I don't want to move our men from the outer cordon. Can you send backup?
You were listening in there directly, obviously, to police radio. That's what one of the police officers who is right outside the hospital is seeing.
OK, so 2 minutes at worst, so let's give ourselves 2 minutes to make a decision.
Whatever it takes, those people cannot leave that hospital.
I think if the absolute worst happened and somebody was shot, that is going to hold the other people back. They're not going to want to put themselves in that situation.
They can fire in the air, they know it's going to happen.
It's a horrible, horrible
It seems clear
option.
to me that we have a riot brewing there, and riot control, with all the tried and tested methods, is the only thing. We can't arrest people.
What happens if somebody gets through?
Well, we don't know yet, and we'd cross that bridge if we came to it. But of the options...
But by the time we come to it, they'll have infected
look at the
other
options.
people.
We can't arrest people. We've got nowhere to take them.
No, we agree that.
We start using firearms now, you've got to be joking. You don't use firearms in a situation like this. Riot control buys us as long as it needs to buy us until further developments. It's the least bad of 3 terrible options.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. There are still developments over the ferry. The minister's decision is put on hold as they're forced to deal with another problem. News of the plague in Liverpool has reached the ferry, and there is unrest on board. I'd like to connect you back to the Coast Guard at Holyhead.
The ferry is docked safely, but there's a problem. The captain's on the line right now.
We've been advised by our medics to turn off the heating and air conditioning, and it's now very cold. I'm worried that some of the passengers may get hypothermia, but there's a more serious problem. Some of the crew think that there is plague on the ship and they want to get off. They've activated the bow doors against my orders. They'll be open in a couple of minutes. I don't want to put out to sea with the bow doors open. The weather's terrible, there's a chance she could go down.
We need a quick decision here. What would you like the captain to do? Order the ferry to put out to sea immediately, or allow people off the ferry?
Back out to sea.
See, we haven't had any update on that ferry, have we? You know, you said about whether it's seasickness
Let's have
or not.
a few annoyed people slightly out to sea where we can manage them. Yeah? And we've got to make it quickly before they can take the decision to go against us, yeah?
I don't disagree with that.
How do you feel about that?
We're going to have another mini riot on our hands,
OK.
but it's
let them bobble around a bit.
Before they have the opportunity to make any other decision,
you can't allow
let's
people
just
off.
put it back out to sea.
I agree.
Yeah.
Quick question of clarification. Allowing people off, does that mean randomly allowing people off, or again, allowing people off to be taken to a safe place?
We're going to have a hospital situation where
We've
people...
got one now.
No matter what we do, we're going to have people trying to distribute themselves.
If you need to ask that question, Minister, I thought we had a decision.
Well, I'm sorry, I thought we did too, but looking at allowing people off, it's open to interpretation, which people, where to.
So we don't have a decision?
Well, if we can take another few seconds to take advice from Charles, if it's possible to ferry, so to speak, people from the ferry to a contained, safe place?
The problem is we're very overstretched throughout. There are no effective quarantine facilities.
I mean, if the answer is no, then it seems as though...
It appears that is the case.
It's more difficult to do that, so let's put it back out to sea while we've got the time
they've got the
to make that
hypothermia.
choice.
I mean, some are going to die a bit, but...
So we're in agreement.
There we go.
Ministers, you'll have to come to a decision now.
Put out to sea.
Do you want that ferry to leave?
Absolutely.
Now.
Yes.
You've taken a unanimous decision, and that decision will be enacted.
Bow doors open, turn round, woof.
Despite the chance that the ferry could sink with over 2,000 passengers on board, the ministers were correct to order it back out to sea. Crisis managers agree that the consequences of not containing the plague could be even more disastrous than the sinking of a ferry. By acting quickly, the ministers may have averted a national epidemic. Back at the hospital in Liverpool, the angry crowd is still contained within the main building.
How long do you think you can hold them there? 2 minutes maybe, 5 minutes at most. Can you send backup?
The ministers still have a vital decision to make.
Can I just ask, are they equipped with all those people in that hospital? Is there enough people there? Because I got the impression we'd only got 40 people.
Well, the situation is, ministers, at the moment, you've got this glass door that's obviously containing them in a very tight space. So you've got the officers there at the door that can handle it at this very moment. If that door goes and people come out in a big mass, those few officers, you heard this chief officer said there are only 2 on the door.
Yeah.
This is the problem. What happens if it doesn't work?
And how many riot police do we have?
We've only got about 20 riot police, but you've only got 2 or 3 by the door. You've only got
So we've got 20 riot police, and how many people are attempting to get out of there?
At the front line, right at the front line outside the hospital.
A lot of people, they're running down the slope towards the barriers. Stand by to engage. Stand by.
Right. Just stop them. Whatever it takes, stop them. Surely. We can't let them out.
Do you agree?
They're out. Just stop them now.
What do you mean, stop them?
I mean, whatever means. If they have
what
to
do
be
you mean,
killed,
stop them?
they have to be killed.
Even if we have the firearm situation, they're going to try other methods first. That is, you know, if people do not follow instructions, that is the absolute last thing they will do anyway. But I think we need to give them the right to do that. We need to authorise the right to do that if all other means fail.
The right to do.
The right to shoot them if all other means fail.
Just hang on a minute. We've got a number of potentially quite healthy people, running around, being shot at in case they're unwell.
As you argue, potentially, they are also potentially infected with the variant strain of pneumonic plague that they can infect many thousands of people.
But the one guaranteed thing is if we issue an authorisation for shooting to start, we're going to kill people, guaranteed. Even if there are people with this disease running around, infecting other people, they're still not guaranteed to kill them. Now, it seems to me 2 black and white choices here. You cannot start running around shooting people in case they might infect someone.
Ministers, can I just ask you both one question? The first woman to break cover here, let's imagine, is a heavily pregnant woman. She's running down the street. What are you going to do? Tell people to shoot her down, gun her down in the street?
Absolutely.
If we give them every other option first, if you know, they'll...
Minister, the pictures will be on every single broadcast tonight and tomorrow.
Got to stop them coming out.
Shooting people in the street. These aren't criminals. These are either sick people or completely well people who don't want to become sick.
If we had a national plague...
Sorry, take a look at this. This is what the news channel has just reported.
Well, we have a very serious situation developing here. As you can see behind me, an angry group of patients have managed to force their way right up to this barrier. This is the edge of the cordoned-off quarantine area. They're determined to get out of there. The police are equally determined to keep them in there. I can see that riot vans are arriving with police reinforcements. There are armed police on the scene, and we're now being told to move away from here for our own safety. We'll bring you more on this as soon as we can.
If we had a national plague disaster, that's still better than our police shooting innocent people in the streets of Liverpool. It's a dreadful situation. You cannot have our police shooting people in case they're unwell. It's a non-option.
Just
look at the options. Yeah. The arrest option doesn't exist either.
We've all
agreed
there are too
that's
many
not
of them.
An option. We only have whatever riot control means. That's our only option left.
Yeah, I completely support the idea of riot control, completely. But we're being told there's approximately 20 officers.
But give me another option,
Given
Kate.
the size of that crowd...
Frighten them. Put the baton rounds into a few of them. That'll desist them. That'll quieten them down.
But
they
riot
can tell them,
control...
look, you're staying where you are.
Perhaps we need some more advice on exactly what is...
I think you've got the issue here, Minister, that you've got a clear-cut decision to make, because you cannot now, at this stage, you've seen this is the very last barrier, you've seen the number of people. As soon as that barrier goes, you're going to have a lot of people escaping. You've got this situation that you either decide to allow them to engage with baton rounds, of which there are perhaps 3 or 4 officers there with baton guns. They're single-shot weapons. They fire 4 baton rounds. That's their capability finished. Or you give them the capability, if that fails, to then open fire. And when you give the police the right to do that, if you like, of course the police are not going to open fire unless it justifies it at the scene, but they are looking to you to give them some sort of
This is your last chance to contain it.
Absolutely.
If the army were on the scene...
Well, there wouldn't be a problem, because they would be there in sufficient numbers to be able to
The
hold
army
it.
on the scene, Ministers.
No.
You can see how urgent this is, please.
Well, it's very clear to me, we have a riot there, we need riot control. Arrest is a non-option.
Sorry, we must go over again to the
people.
police who are at the scene just outside the hospital.
We have a man down. I think he's been hit by a bottle. They're running along the barriers looking for a way through. They're going to find one any minute. We can't be everywhere at once. Just do your best. I'm still awaiting orders. Hold that cordon.
You're suggesting the order is what?
To use whatever force necessary to stop that crowd infecting
Because
the rest
they won't
of Britain.
use it unless it is absolutely necessary to contain it.
Well, I'm struggling to see the distinction between
But if
riot
they get
control,
through, we're not going to have
riot
this choice
control
anymore.
and using firearms. It seems to me we go there first.
Ministers, do you have a decision for me?
Yes.
Riot control.
Firearms.
Use firearms.
Minister, don't be confused about this. If you authorise firearms, of course they will try riot control first. They don't want to kill people. But you are giving the authority for them, if that fails, to then open fire.
Well, that's exactly what I'm objecting to. We cannot have policemen shooting people in the streets.
They're going to get through
Minister,
anyway.
Minister, time's gone. What is your decision? What do you want to do?
Riot control. I'm very clear about it.
Use firearms.
Minister?
Use firearms.
Minister, that is the decision.
It's disaster.
And it will be enacted. The ministers will have to wait to see whether this decision was the right one.
And let's see whether they actually use them. As long as they contain them, we just can't let it escape, surely. Whatever
But
that
I come back
takes.
to the point. One thing is guaranteed.
Should have brought the army in earlier on,
we
and
should
then it would have been all right.
One thing is
wouldn't we?
guaranteed: use firearms, you're going to kill people.
Yeah.
This way round, then, you know, it's not guaranteed that the minute you contract this disease, you die.
No, but we said we'd quarantine the hospital, so everything else has been used to do it. So when do you say we're not going to quarantine the hospital?
Well, I'd like to have held up the ball, so to speak, with riot control until the army arrived, if that had been possible. But
yeah, but we don't have all them options. That's the problem, isn't it? The right option might never be there.
Shooting people is
it's the last
It's the worst
form
option
of
there is,
defence.
isn't it?
Absolutely. The last form of defence.
And,
but we
you know, the minute one innocent, well person falls, then what do we have? A national riot.
Or 100,000 people become infected.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we're
a plague is a
responsible for
plague,
that.
and everyone understands, such as we do, that it's contagious, people die. But we're now dying with our own bullets. I mean...
It's the sacrifice of a few to save many, surely.
You explain that to the families.
Well, we'll have to do, won't
It's
we?
an unprecedented decision to actually shoot innocent British citizens in the
Unprecedented,
street.
yeah.
Absolutely unprecedented.
Absolutely, and this is an unprecedented situation that we're facing. If they just stay where they are, they won't get shot.
Yeah,
And we're not going to shoot them all.
We've contained them. They know why
drawing
they're
a
being
line.
contained.
The problem is, I don't
we've made
think...
it. You know, we've barred it.
CK, I think we haven't contained them. They're going to break through those lines, being shot at. You've got a national disaster.
Ministers, I think we do have an update from the police who are at the scene.
The armed units have opened fire and it looks like 4 rioters are dead or seriously injured. The other rioters are running back in. It looks like the last 8 or 9 of them are heading back into the hospital.
So we've
Doesn't make me
contained
feel
it
any
then.
better.
Yeah.
We don't know that 4 are dead at the moment. But it's not looking good, is it?
But they have contained them and put them back.
Do you know, if we just got riot police, they may not have known how serious it is that they do go back inside. It's a horrible thing to do.
So very quickly, Ministers, do you think you did the right thing?
I'm not clear what's happened. Four have been shot, is it? 4?
The report on the ground is that the rest have gone back into the hospital and that there are 4 who were shot.
We've contained it again.
Sure, that's the news we've...
At the price of 4, who knows, potentially innocent lives.
Well, it does look, for the moment, as if the situation has been...
We're all innocent, aren't we? It's just where we are at the time.
If the disease has been contained because they've all run back into the hospital, that's a better result than if they'd gone running around the streets of Liverpool. That's for certain.
It's not going to feel any more comfortable.
Whether it justifies shooting 4 people or not...
Nothing can justify it.
I just
we
can't
don't know
there.
whether anything else would have had them go back, and we just don't know.
No.
Ministers, you have taken your last decision, and your time in charge of the country is over. The Minister's decision to authorise the use of firearms was correct. Crisis managers agree that to contain a disease as virulent and deadly as pneumonic plague, this extreme measure would be justified. Under proposed legislation, the Secretary of State may enforce any provision which he thinks necessary to prevent the loss of life in such an emergency. During this crisis, the ministers made 5 correct and 2 incorrect decisions. By sealing the hospital, putting the ferry out to sea, and containing the riot, they have prevented a devastating national epidemic. Ministers, I'd like to take you forward 6 weeks from now to see how the decisions you took concerning the plague outbreak in this country, how they developed, what the impact was.
The plague epidemic in Liverpool was successfully contained by prompt and effective action from the emergency services. That's the conclusion of an inquiry into the outbreak published today by the World Health Organization. The director of the WHO says that he believes the government's actions averted a global pandemic which could have led to millions of casualties. The final death toll from the Liverpool outbreak was 17.
Ministers, during the time that you were running the country, you had advisors, and they were not only giving you advice, they were also assessing you on your performance as ministers.
Ministers, the first decision you had involved whether you wanted to bring in the army, and in a way, the fact that you didn't bring in the army, which had extra resources, made all your subsequent decisions more difficult to take because you were always short of resources when it came to the difficult time. But having said that, having got that decision wrong, you then recovered well throughout the rest of the time that went on. You took the much more difficult decisions, and you took them in a timely fashion, turning the ferry round just in the nick of time and thus saving a worldwide spread, perhaps, of the plague.
As ministers, your overriding aim is indeed to save life, and today that meant containing the spread of a highly infectious disease. And you achieved this, I think, by what were, in fact, quite hard-nosed decisions. The only aspect, perhaps slight criticism of, is that had you made your decision quicker, to allow the police to use the full range of riot control equipment, there would have been more success at that early stage.
Ministers, over the last few hours, you had to take a series of extraordinary decisions about an outbreak of pneumonic plague here in Britain. You decided to quarantine the city of Liverpool. You decided to open fire on unarmed civilians. And let's hope no ministers ever have to take decisions such as you took today. And now, you are free to leave the Crisis Command Centre.
We're all very different characters, very different personalities, but I think as a team we work well.
I thought 1 or 2 views were extreme.
Obviously, we had to shoot 1 or 2 people in the hospital.
You do take a sense of ownership with every single horrible decision.
I think that majority vote's a very helpful way of resolving issues. We could have been there till midnight or more.
I think that my strengths lie in running a commercial company, and I think I would find it very hard to make the switch into politics.
I'd love to have a go at running the country if they'd ever let me, but not under these circumstances, no.
I'm sure I could run the country, and I'm sure it would be a wonderful place to live in.
For another perspective on tonight's scenario, switch over to BBC4 in 10 minutes for a follow-up of this crisis command. We would like to stress that events of this nature are extremely rare. If you have been affected by the content of tonight's programme and would like to speak to an experienced advisor who can provide details of organisations that can offer information and support, then call the BBC Action Line on 08000 56 60 65. That's 08000 56 60 65. All calls are free and confidential.